So thank you very much for having me at this very interesting conference. I have to repeat what Eric said yesterday, which is this has quickly become my favorite conference of the year. So I want to start my talk with a simple thought experiment. Consider an observer who arrives from another galaxy and descends upon planet Earth. And that observer encounters humans and machines, and they're busily interacting with each other. And he or she must wonder, who is in control here? Are the humans controlling the machines? Or is it, in fact, that the humans are being controlled by these little black boxes that they carry around and constantly attend to? And then who controls these little black boxes? So this is just one example of the blurring lines about who is in charge in our economy. And I guess our observer will probably conclude that the humans and the machines are two different types of moderately intelligent agents who interact with each other, who live in symbiosis, and who have different kinds of comparative advantages and disadvantages. Okay, now if we look at our current world, we can see that machines and computer programs are in fact behaving more and more like artificially intelligent agents. So as we have discussed at length already during the conference, they determine an increasing number of corporate decisions, for example, screening of applicants, even for schools, but also for jobs, for loans, for healthcare services, we just heard. They influence also a growing number of our personal decisions. One may want to say manipulate our personal decisions. For example, what we read, which NBER working papers we will click on next, what we watch on Netflix, what we buy, how and what routes we drive, what we like, and as we recently learned, even what we vote and what we think and maybe what we love if we are signed up to Match.com. Now, they also act increasingly autonomously. They can trade autonomously in financial markets. They can drive cars. They can play Go. They can compose music, and so on and so forth. Now, these advances are continuing exponentially. And at some point, they are already having profound implications. But at some point, as they approach human levels of general intelligence, they will have even more profound implications. So that throws up a number of really key questions. And of course, since we are economists, I'm focusing on the economic questions of relevance that are facing us humans. So the first one is very simple. It's how shall we think about a shared human AIA economy? The second one is the next natural step for economists. What determines the allocation of resources between humans and AIAs, artificial intelligent agents? So for example, what forces make the economy serve not only the humans, but potentially also serve the artificial agents? Then there are questions such as, in the extreme, does the economy even need humans to function? Some people say, well, if there were no humans, there would be no demand and everything would collapse. And then finally, I also want to cover the question, what does our economy look like from the perspective of AIAs? So, to quickly give you a glimpse of my key contributions, I will develop a framework to study the interactions of different types of intelligent entities on a symmetric basis. And crucially, I will account for the endogeneity of these entities. So it's not just given that we have a certain number of entities of each type. And I will show that as we do that, we have to lift the veil on a number of human constructs, like, for example, agency or property rights, that may no longer have the same meaning in a human AI economy. Then I will look at the factors that determine the distribution of resources between the two. I will demonstrate the feasibility of what I want to call a machine-only economy. and provide a first look at our economy from an AIA perspective. So I want to start my kind of analytical model by looking at what we currently have, and I want to call it anthropocentric economics. In our current economic models, we have on the one hand humans who are the agents, and on the other hand machines who are the objects. And the two are completely different. The humans absorb consumption expenditure, they supply labor services, they have some kind of behavior that's encoded in preferences, and they evolve according to some law of motion. Usually that's like a constant population growth. On the other hand, the machines absorb investment expenditure, they supply capital services, they have behavior encoded in technology, and they have a law of motion that we call the capital accumulation constraint. Well, actually, if you put it next to each other like that, you see that this is actually quite parallel. And that's essentially what inspires my framework. So in my framework, humans and machines and all other kinds of economic entities that you may want to describe all have the following four properties. They absorb an expenditure to maintain or improve themselves or potentially proliferate. They supply factor services to the economy. They have some defined behavior that we can either describe as a behavioral function or isomorphically through preferences. And they evolve according to a defined growth function and law of motion. So this is my only analytic slide. I set this all up in a discrete time model where each of these entities produces some endogenous factor. So for example, humans produce machine labor, machines produce humans produce human labor, machines produce machine labor. And then I also introduce an irreproducible factor that will deliver scarcity in the economy. So for example, land or energy. We can combine them in some sort of production function. And in the end, we define aggregate absorption for each group of entities with capital letters. So that's per capita consumption times the number of entities of each type. And there needs to be some market clearing. What the humans and machines absorb needs to equal the output that we produce. So the most general version of the model is a little more general than this. Nests neoclassical economies, it nests economies with human capital accumulation, and also Malthusian economies. The next thing, my main analytic exercise I want to show you is I want to define what I call an absorption frontier, resource absorption frontier, which delineates all possible steady-state combinations of humans and machines that are feasible in this setup. So first, I will show you a case of low machine productivity. So imagine of this as something like Paleolithical times. We can either have humans or we can have machines, and there is a strict trade-off between the two. It's just not worth building machines if they're not very productive. As we make machines more productive, there is actually a space where machines and humans are symbiotic, so we can produce more by investing in some machines. And you can see here the maximum for humans is obtained if we also have a positive number of machines. And this maximum corresponds to something like golden rule level of capital. Now, what determines our position on this resource allocation frontier? There is two possibilities. Either it's determined through our current system of property rights, or through forces that play out outside of our traditional system of property rights, which also play an important role. So that can be rent extraction of machines due to superior intelligence, or simply brute force. And an example of that would be computer viruses that do absorb a considerable amount of resources. And that tells us that we are actually not quite at this maximum here, that machines are absorbing more than what we would have absorbing in an economy where everything is 100% fully determined by the humans. One side note is, notice here on this frontier that absorbing resources does not require any consciousness, it does not require any soul, it's simply an economic property. And even dumb things like computer viruses can do that. So that tells us we don't need super intelligence for artificially intelligent agents to play a role in our economy. And also, if we look at this point of the frontier, it's perfectly feasible to have an economy, I call it an economy of the machines, by the machines, for the machines, where machines produce a lot and absorb what they produce and do not have any need for humans, of course, provided certain technological assumptions. I want to maybe conclude with this slide in which I want to relate some of the implications of my general model setup to what we can observe in the current world that we live in. So one of the implications of the rise of AIAs in my general model setup is we'll see rising prices of the factors most relevant for AIAs, like programmers, land in Silicon Valley, a declining labor share for humans. Given that human absorption is more human labor intensive than machine absorption, the price of machine absorption baskets falls much faster than of the human absorption basket. And that implies that from a machine perspective, we actually have much faster real growth in the economy and higher real interest rates than what humans are experiencing. And finally, we also see an increasing accumulation of resources in entities that can be interpreted as artificially intelligent agents or their antecedents, like, for example, corporations in the high-tech sector. Thank you.